everybody, this is Jennifer Carney from Carney's Tutoring, and today we're going to be talking about slope, which is also referred to by many teachers as rate of change. Some teachers call it slope. I prefer to call it slope, and sometimes you're going to hear it as rate of change. So I want to make sure that you know that each of those are interchangeable and they mean the same thing. The equation that you really need to get used to seeing here, which is our slope-intercept form, is going to be y equals mx plus b. This is so important, and this is what we call slope-intercept form. And I'll tell you what each letter means in this form. So M, if we didn't have, enough letters in math, we're adding more for you here. M is actually going to be your slope or your rate of change. Slope is known as the steepness in a graph. So like how steep it is, or those are different graphs here, lines that you could have. I like to kind of refer to it with my students. If you've ever been skiing, you're going to pick a slope that's, less or higher. But that's what slope. So think of it as skiing down a mountain. And then your B is going to be your Y-intercept. And this is going to be where your graph crosses the Y-axis. Remember, whenever you are looking at a graph, your Y-axis is the up and down right here. That's your Y. So that's going to be wherever that line crosses the Y-axis, that's going to be what number goes right there. Okay, and then our X and our Y, those are our ordered pair. And I'll go ahead and put them in parentheses because you're used to seeing them like that. That's where you're going to get those numbers from your ordered pair off your graph. So if you were to have a graph as such, and say you had a dot over here, say that was at 3, 2. The 3 would be your X value, and the 2 would be your Y value, and you would put those in the correct spots over here with your X and Y. So that's where those X and Y, where you would get those numbers from. So let's go over here and give you an example. So I'm going to give you a problem. So Y equals 3X plus 4. This is already in Y-intercept form, which is great. So if I asked you to pull out the slope, you would tell me the slope is 3, just like that, just a solid number 3. There's nothing else to write there. And then if I were to ask you to write the Y-intercept, this can vary per teacher. Some of them just want you to write 4. Some of them would like you to write 0. 4. So make sure you ask your teacher what her preference is. This method right here, remember the first number is your X, the second is your Y, and so you're putting that 4, the Y-intercept, right there where the Y value goes, and then just filling the other one in with a 0. So if she wants it as a point, this is going to be what you're going to be writing down. So make sure you distinguish what your teacher wants you to do. And then this would be the answer to that question more than likely. Now, another thing they do, so they say identify your slope and identify your Y-intercept. They could ask you to take this problem right here and graph it. And that's where we see a lot of students have trouble. So I'm going to come over here and show you how you would do that. So I'm going to put 5 ticks here on every side. All right, and so the way that you're going to go ahead and graph this is you're always going to start by graphing your Y-intercept first. So that's really key. Graph, or you could put plot if you want, either way that you think of it. Graph or plot your Y-intercept first. That is really important here. So that's just the number 4, and I know it's going to go on my Y-axis. Remember, up and down is Y, side to side is X. So if this is my Y-intercept, it's going to go on my Y-axis. It is a positive 4, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plot it right there on the Y-intercept. That is your y-axis. Now, from that point right there, you're going to move the slope. Slope is known as rise over run. Hopefully you've heard that before. So you're going to rise, could also mean sink, up or down, depending on positive or negative. Positive is going to go up and negatives are going to go down, and then you run side to side, however many that is. So if you have a whole number sitting up here in this spot right here, you're going to put a 1 underneath it, because every slope needs to be put as a fraction before you can come over here to your graph. So I went ahead and wrote a whole number as a fraction. You always can just put a 1 underneath it. So here's my rise over run. So it says from the point that I just graphed, here's my point that I just graphed, I am going to rise up positive 3. And it's going to go off my graph here, but I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to run positive 1. So that's to the right, because positives are to the right. 1. Now, I could also do the opposite. I could turn these both into the opposite signs that they currently have. I'm sorry, that should be a 1. Then they both have. So it would mean go from that original point, remember, back to the original point, down 3. 1, 2, 3, but this time go -1, which would be right here. So do you kind of see that line starting to form here? Again, I'm freehanding this, so this could, it should be a straight line on your graph paper. But your line would come right like that. 3 points make a line. You can do more than 3 points if you want. What you would do is you would just go from this point again, and you could go down 3, 1, 2, 3 to the left 1, and put another point. You could also do the same thing up here and rise up. So we had positive 3 right here and positive 1, and then we switched them and did -3 and -1. So let me erase these not to give you any confusion here. So that is how you would take a slope-intercept form, and you would pull out, here's your slope is 3, your y-intercept is 4. Remember, our main thing here, this is very, very important. You want to graph your y-intercept first. Okay, say that to yourself. I want to graph the y-intercept first. And that another way to think of that is it's always going to be the number that is not next to your x value, because don't get confused if they throw you an equation like this. It is not always necessarily the number on the end of the equation. Okay, so it's the number next to the x is always going to be your slope. If it is next to the x value, it is always going to be your slope. Look at how those are just connected. The one that's free over here by himself, not connected right to the x, is always going to be your y-intercept, no matter how they write it. So don't get stuck on the fact that it's always going to be the last one in your equation, like we looked at back here, that it's on the end. That is just the customary form to write it, but you can definitely see it written in different ways where it's not hanging on the end here. So get used to seeing it in both formats, on the end and in front. And there are some that'll have them mixed up, and you'll have to start moving them around here shortly, and we'll get to that. So this is slope-intercept form. So this is slope-intercept form right here. It's identifying your slope. Remember, slope is always going to be connected to your x, and it's going to tell your steepness, how steep something is. Okay? And then your y-intercept, the first thing we're always going to graph is just that point on the y-axis, wherever that is. Then we're always going to have an ordered pair. Your ordered pair are going to be your x and your y in your equation. So let's do one more example. I'm going to give you y equals 1/4 x minus 2. So it's a little bit more difficult. Anytime somebody sees a fraction, I think they tend to freak out. Fractions can be your friend, okay? So don't worry. More than likely you have a calculator with you or anything. Don't freak out. Don't start to hyperventilate. We're good. So first thing we want to do is we always want to pull out and identify our slope. Remember, our slope is always what is right next to the x value. So our x value, what's right next to it, is 1/4. So 1/4 is going to be our slope. Our y-intercept is going to be the number hanging out by itself. It's actually going to be the sign in front goes with the number. It's going to be -2. Remember I spoke before, your teacher may want you to write it as an ordered pair. That means that you want to write it in X, Y format. So remember that sign in the front. This is a -2. We want to write that down. All right, so what we would do now, if your teacher just asked you to identify those, you would be done with that question. Just make sure you figure out which way that she would rather you write it. And then if she wanted you to graph it, she would usually have this little graph set up for you over here. Or you could freehand it. Sometimes on homeworks you have to freehand it because they don't, have the graph paper for you. So what you're going to do, remember, always, we talked about this before, always plot Y-intercept first. Okay, I know right now you're seeing it at the end of the equation, but we're going to do it first. So our Y-intercept is -2. Remember, the Y runs up and down. These are positive numbers. This is 0. So we're going to go down to -2 and put a dot. From there, we're going to do the slope. Remember, slope equals rise over run. If we have a whole number, we put it over 1. This time, we have a fraction, 1/4. So from this original right here, from this original dot that we just did our Y-intercept, we are going to rise up 1, and we're going to go to the right, +4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You do not have to do these little hops if you don't want to. You can also make it the opposite. The opposite of +1 is -1. The opposite of +4 is -4. So I could go back to my original, and I could go down 1, negative direction 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. There we go. 3 points make a line. You could always do more points if you need. I've just graphed this equation over here. Okay, so it's as easy as starting with the Y-intercept. If you plot that first, you should then be able to do your rise over run and get your graph or your line from there. If you have any further questions about slope or rate of change, please comment below or go ahead and send us an email at carneystutoring@gmail.com and we'd be happy to help you. Thank you. Bye-bye.